There's never a dull moment when it comes to Minnesota sports. Whether it's positive or negative.
The Yankees have swept the Twins.
Minnesota Sports Chat has you covered. Talking nothing but Minnesota sports all year long. It's time now for the soon-to-be award-winning, if only in his own mind, Minnesota Sports Chat with your host, Ross Brendel.
Well, here we go. Edition number 246 of the soon-to-be award-winning Minnesota Sports Chat, presented by my friends at Beans Coffee Company. Promo code SportsChat at coffeebybeans.com will save you some cash upon checkout of the world's greatest coffee. This podcast is award-winning, if only in my own mind, but let's be honest, if only in my own mind is really only what matters. We welcome in Mr. Manny Hill from Jazz88 MPS Voices, Purple Insider contributor, work at SKOR North and 1500 ESPN, the voice of Todd Field in Hastings. And as I always say, I'm assuming I'm leaving something out, but it is good to have you, Manny, as we talk a little sports on this record date of Friday morning.
Good Actually, to be with you, my friend.
That's also not a date. Let me correct myself. On this record day of Friday, date March 7th, 2025.
It's good to be with you.
How you been? Good?
Yeah, really busy. Doing a lot of stuff with the MPS Voices front on the sports broadcasting side of things with our sports director, Nick Tuckner, who you and I both have known for a really long time. He's doing a great job. We've been putting some games on the web stream the last few weeks with a lot of basketball, and we did some hockey earlier before the Minneapolis teams ended their seasons in section play. But yeah, other than that, just been living life and enjoying the ride.
You mentioned hockey, so I'll take this here very quickly. About a week ago, Bill Guerin makes a trade, gives up a second-round pick late last night, makes a trade, gives up a few players and a sixth-round pick. Sounds like they may be in talks for a bigger fish today. NHL trade deadline is later today. A lot of you will listen to this after that. Whether something happens or not is to be determined. I do think it's comical. I love Bill Guerin. I think he's probably, when it comes to soundbite and honesty or giving you information, perhaps the best general manager in town, which I appreciate. However, as I was texting somebody this morning, the longer he has been here, it feels like the future be damned. I will trade any draft pick I possibly have if it helps me right now. And, you know, there's two sides to that coin. I have no problem with that if it pays off in winning. The problem is, in this town, it so seldomly pays off in winning. So I think you just need to be careful about robbing from the future to pay now. However, I do think this Minnesota Wild team is a much better, more of a factor than I think a lot of people thought, me included. And I also think there's some playing going on to your star player, trying to show him that we want to win, we intend to win. So we're going to do this now if it helps you sign a contract with us in the offseason.
Now, I have not, they've been a little off my radar the last week or so. Is Kaprizov, is he back?
That's a great question. I did not watch. Yeah, no, he is. He is. I did not watch the last few games. And to your point, they've also been off my radar for multiple reasons. So I feel bad, kind of ripping the general manager when I haven't been as engaged. But I brought this up.
The reason why I asked the question is because, sorry to cut you off. The reason why I asked the question is because, Billy Guerin's making all those moves and your two best players are, banged up. Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek are both like banged up and dealing with injuries. So, if you're not going to have those guys back, what's really the point of making all these moves at the deadline to try and get more guys that are going to help you? If your two best players are hurt, it's not really going to matter what sort of moves that you make, unless you think you're not going to get those guys back and you're, sort of selling off pieces to try and work work and build on your future.
You know, it would be nice if at some point you get draft picks back. Now, generally, when that happens, that means you're probably not good and you're selling off. So I understand that, but just thought that was interesting to wake up this morning and see another trade where they moved out a few bodies and a late round pick for another player, and who knows what'll happen today.
And to be fair, it sounds like the Wild have one thing that Billy Guerin's done a really nice job of is just sort of rebuilding the farm system, that they do have some young guys down in the system that eventually over the next couple of years we're going to start seeing come up and sort of turn this thing into a even more of a contender, hopefully over the next several years.
Well, and more money to spend, which I'm assuming he's thinking maybe I don't need as much draft capital if I have a bit more money to spend in free agency. All right. We'll leave that there so I don't get in too deep trying to talk about something I don't know a ton about this year. Very big on Gopher hockey, though, as you can see, checking out the first round of the Big Ten hockey tournament where the Gophers will host Notre Dame as the 2 seed in the vaunted Big Ten hockey conference, which, by the way, has gotten much better. The main issue with it continues to be it's 7 teams, and one of the teams is not a real Big Ten team with Notre Dame, obviously. But anyways, we'll leave that there. Go Gopher hockey. They're where we would expect them to be as a program. They're now basically every year in the mix. They have a roster that I think could win the national championship. I don't believe that they will. I think there's still issues with the roster. I think at times they are. I don't think it's always a great sign, Manny, when a team doesn't play well on Friday. You can tell Friday night or Saturday morning they got reamed by the coach. Then they come out and completely boat race somebody.
Yeah.
You can't get away with that when you go to a one and done tournament. And you know what? Sometimes teams with so much talent, they do turn it on and turn it off. Maybe that'll happen with this team.
So what you're saying is they're going to go to the national championship and lose to some team out east that we've never heard of.
Union, I talk about this with a couple friends all the time. The Union game doesn't bug me so much. You lost by 3 goals and you gave up 7. Okay. The Quinnipiac one where you legitimately quit playing hard for the last 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And lost that one. That honestly has stuck with me so much longer than I thought it would.
The one.
Every time I think about that, I'm annoyed. Yeah, again, Union, whatever. They were scoring goals every 5 minutes.
And they had a bunch of like 25-year-olds on that roster. Yeah.
Correct. The Quinnipiac one is annoying when immediately after the game you start hearing things from some of the players like, maybe we weren't pressing enough in the third. But yeah, you think the whole damn third period was played on a hill and you were at the bottom of it the entire time. All right, let's move on. We've spent 8 minutes in not my strong suit this year, largely talking about the Wild Gopher hockey. I'll count that as a strong suit. So anyways, let's move on to something you and I pay a lot of attention to, the Minnesota Vikings in the offseason. You actually are fresh off an appearance on the Purple Insider pod with Matthew Caller, I believe Brian Murphy.
Yep.
I'm still trying to divulge what all this Sam Darnold news means about, are the Vikings interested? Are they not interested? Do they want Sam Darnold back? Do they not want Sam Darnold back? We'll know a lot more about that in a handful of days. My gut says it's the same thing with Kirk Cousins last year. I think the Vikings would have brought Kirk Cousins back if it was absolutely at their term in length and at their term in price. I think they'll do the same with Sam Darnold. If the deal for Sam Darnold is 1 year, $18 million, $20 million, I'm sure the Vikings would say, sure, come on back. You can start the year. And if it doesn't go well, we'll move on to JJ McCarthy. I would be shocked if the Vikings give him a 3-year, 80, 90, 100-ish million dollar deal because, not to be mean, but I think they would immediately become easily rippable, almost as rippable as the Falcons were when they signed Kirk Cousins, then drafted Amir Penix. What is the point in drafting a guy in the top third of the first round if when you have the absolute opportunity to play him after 1 year and you decide we're going to wait another year or two to see how good he is? This is not like a Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre situation, or you're holding on to a Hall of Fame quarterback and you'll just sit tight. That's not what this is. I think Sam Darnold showed last year he can be a really good NFL quarterback. He's probably never going to be great. He's probably never going to be elite. I don't buy this Vikings interest. I think this is, you've realized you probably couldn't tag and trade him, so you didn't. So now you're hoping to talk up his value so you can hopefully get a comp pick in return in next year's draft or down the road. It is the NFL. It is the Vikings. It wouldn't surprise me. I don't believe Adam Schefter is stupid at all. However, I do believe he is probably feeding the information that he's being told, and the Vikings might not even believe what they're saying. So I guess I'm very interested to see how this plays out. I would take Sam Darnold back on a year deal with no real guarantees. But if you're Sam Darnold, why would you ever take that? Because I got to believe, even if it's a place you don't want to really go to, you would get much more financial security and term from somebody else beyond another 1-year deal with the Minnesota Vikings.
And I also think, and I agree with everything you said, by the way, I also think that if you're Sam, you do have to kind of like weigh what your options are here, in that, okay, you could go out in the open market and somebody like, I don't know, somebody like maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Las Vegas Raiders, somebody that's going to need a quarterback, which, again, shocker, there's a handful of teams in the offseason that need quarterbacks. It's just, this is a thing that we see every single offseason. There's always like 5 or 6 teams where you look at and say, that team needs that team needs a quarterback. So, I mean, Sam could go out on the market and look for one of those teams to give him the kind of bag that he wants. And honestly, a bag that he may have deserved at this point, that he's earned at least, by, putting together a 14-win season and throwing for 4,000 yards, 35 touchdowns, all of that stuff. Sam had a really good year last year. The other side of it is door number 2 is going back to the Vikings on a deal that kind of suits them a little bit better. And the benefit from that, if you're Sam, is that you're playing in a system that you've already got a year of under your belt. You had a lot of success with it last year. This is a team that's kind of revitalized your career. You know what I mean? Do you want to stick it out with them for another year and try and go on another, try to put together another good season? So there's that as well. But if you're the Vikings, it's, as you said, you want to bring him back at your price, what makes sense for you, so that you can still go out and, spend some money in free agency to try and bolster this defense. You know what I mean? There's, this team's got decisions that they've got to make on several players who are pending free agents, of their own, that they're going to potentially lose. Guys like Byron Murphy Jr., Cam Bynum, they got to figure this out. Theo Jackson, you saw they just gave him a 2-year extension. Pretty good deal for him. Probably a little bit of an insurance in case Harrison Smith decides to step away. But even then, you got to figure out, okay, we really, if Harrison Smith retires, okay, it's great. We got Theo Jackson locked up. We still need to get, we still got to figure out if we're going to keep Cam Bynum around as well. Because you need 2 safeties, not 1. And you don't want to move Josh Metellus out of the current role that he has, because that's where he's great at. But anyway, going back to Sam, I'm going on a tangent here. Going back to Sam, I'm with you on the fact that, they are wanting to bring him back at their price, because the difference in, something like, because the type of contract that you mentioned is something similar to what Geno Smith got with the Seahawks, what Baker Mayfield got in Tampa Bay. The difference is those teams didn't really have other options at quarterback unless they were going to draft somebody. And neither one of those teams were really in position to draft a young guy unless they were going to, trade up more assets to move up and try and take a guy. The difference is the Vikings have J.J. McCarthy to turn to if Sam Darnold's not going to come back on the deal that they want. So they have J.J. McCarthy in their back pocket, who they love, who they're very excited about. So that's kind of where they're at. I said it on Purple Insider the other night when me and Murph were on with Collar. My gut tells me that Sam Darnold's going to be playing elsewhere in 2025, and that J.J. McCarthy is going to be starting week 1 for the Vikings in 2025.
Turn my mic back on. I don't think that organizations largely should ever make decisions based off of what fan reaction should be, especially if they think that it is the right move. I do think occasionally you do have to think about the fans, because the fans are what allow you to have your product and spend on your team, right? You need them involved. You need them engaged. I don't know, Manny. I know when you think back to last year's Purple Daily draft party, you had 1,000 people legitimately celebrating a party atmosphere that J.J. McCarthy was drafted. Then I know the following year, Sam Darnold has a really nice year for the Vikings. You mentioned it, the 35 touchdown passes, engineering some great drives, some really exciting moments. I just don't know. Let's say the Vikings signed him to a 2-year deal, a 3-year deal where he gets a decent amount of money. I just don't know if the fan reaction, I feel like the fan reaction would be more like, really? Then, oh, yeah, great move. I just feel like by and large, I don't know if fans would hate it, because I think Sam Darnold's, it's a great story. He's so easy to cheer for. I will cheer for him if he's the starting quarterback for the Vikings week 1 next year. I will cheer for him every game next year unless he plays the Vikings. I just think it is a great story, what he went through sports-wise. I don't want to make it out like he's some martyr or he didn't deal with a lot other players haven't dealt with before. But he's an easy person to cheer for, so I will always cheer for him. I just don't know if the fans would be super excited. If it was like a 1-year, $20 million deal again, like another Prove It deal, I think fans would be okay with that, because then you would still think, okay, there's an exit plan. It's JJ McCarthy's team at some point. And again, I'm not saying JJ McCarthy is going to be good. None of us know that, but I think the Vikings need to start that clock and figure that out sooner rather than later. Now, maybe they've already seen some things behind the scenes that they don't love, but everything that most of us have heard is, now granted they're going to do this because they have to, is that they're still incredibly high on him. So yeah. I guess my 2 points are, it just doesn't, the timing to bring him back just doesn't make sense. And I feel like most fans, I feel like maybe you think differently from me, but I feel like the fan reaction would kind of be kind of like the Larry David. Huh. I kind of feel like that's what most people would think.
Yeah, it does feel like that, just because of and I talked about this the other night. It's just some of the vitriol that's been kind of thrown at Sam Darnold that I think is a little bit undeserved, based off of the entire season that he had. And I think, just the last 2 games, the Detroit game, week 18, the wild card game in Arizona against the Rams, that's still very fresh in everybody's minds. And those 2 games are the last 2 sort of images that everybody has of Sam Darnold in a Vikings uniform. And so it's easy to kind of just fall on that 2 big games, the 2 biggest games of the season, and just say like, hey, that's more of the guy than the previous, 16 games that we saw from him. You know what I mean? And it kind of forgets the game against the Packers the week before they played the Lions, where he played very well in. So I don't know. I'm kind of at a point now where I start to, with all due respect to the fan base, because I'm a fan myself, I've just started to. What's that?
I said we both are. We both are.
Yeah.
Most media members can act like they're not fans, but if you're from here and you grew up around the team, you're always going to be a fan in some way, shape, or form.
100%. But having said all of that, though, I've just tried to pay less attention, with all due respect to everybody else who's a fan of this town, and everybody deserves to have their fandom and feel how they want to feel. And I don't want to tell anybody else how to feel. But I've just tried to pay less and less attention to that, and just kind of like look at it from my own lens. And even though I'm a fan, I still try to be as realistic as possible when all of this stuff comes to fruition. So for me, it's like if they decide to bring Sam Darnold back, I'm going to look at that and say, okay, well, looks like they're probably going to have them both compete for the starting job. And, crazy stuff happens in this league, Ross. Guys get injured. Guys decide that they want out. We're seeing that DK Metcalf suddenly wants to be out of Seattle. You know what I mean? That whole news broke the other day. So things happen. You bring Sam Darnold back. What if somebody else's quarterback gets hurt? Now you're in a situation where JJ McCarthy wins the starting job in camp. You've got Sam Darnold as a trade chip, the way you can move him on to another team, similar to what happened when Teddy Bridgewater got hurt. It's hard to believe it was 9 years ago now. When that happened and the Vikings swung the trade for Sam Bradford, and that got the Eagles a first-round pick. First-round pick ended up being Derek Barnett, and he actually helped them win a Super Bowl a year later. Sorry to cut open that wound, but yeah, I mean, it's this league is. I think we've learned enough from this league now over the years of watching it, and as we've gotten older and learned more and understood things more, that crazy things happen, and a lot of times things work out the way that they should. And so I think one way or the other, regardless of what happens with Sam Darnold and the Vikings, it's going to work out the way that it should. And I think the Vikings ultimately are going to make the right decision when this comes about.
I've asked you this before, but is it possible that Sam Darnold just played poorly in those final few games of the year because they were later games in the day and he just wasn't as caffeinated as he was in the morning? He probably should have purchased some coffee from Beans Coffee Company at coffeebybeans.com with roasts and blends for anybody's palate. Truly great stuff. I'm drinking it right now. I got my Profectus blend in here, the 3-bean, the Mikado. There's truly something for everybody. Check it out. Light, dark, medium. Coffeebybeans.com. You can even set up a coffee subscription. You'll never run out of coffee if you have it coming weekly, every other week, monthly, whatever you want to do. Coffeebybeans.com. Promo code SportsChat. People ask me, we all get this. Besides listening, how can we support the pod? Well, you can support the people that support the pod, including my friends at Beans Coffee Company. Coffeebybeans.com. Promo code SportsChat. So I got a theory I'll run by you. It could be wrong. Could find out later today that it's wrong. I'm of the firm belief that Harrison Smith is back next year because the Vikings need to know. Free agency technically starts on Monday. They got the draft coming up. I think both parties know that he's coming back, and they'll probably maybe even do some deal where it gives the Vikings, again, more cap flexibility. I just truly believe if he was, and the Vikings have already done that with him a couple times, if he was going to retire, I think we would have that by now. So I think it's safe to say that he's coming back in purple one more year. But I now do believe we've reached the point with him, which I do think to a degree he's earned. He will never play for another franchise. I do know he wants to win a Super Bowl. So if he keeps playing, logic would tell you he at least believes, whether it's JJ McCarthy or Sam Darnold, that the Vikings have a puncher's chance at winning or appearing in a Super Bowl. So I think he's back just because the Vikings would need to know. And I know at this point, they're probably in his ear and asking him and probably just borderline telling him that, like, buddy, we need to know. So I got a feeling he's back. I don't think this would be just all of a sudden he wakes up tomorrow and says, I'm done. You know, there's a thought process here. So I feel like he's back, and both sides probably know that.
Yeah, you're probably right. And I can't say that I would hate it. I do think that if he does ultimately decide to come back, I think there has to be some sort of because I think he's still a pretty good player. But I think, at this stage of his career, at his age, you've got to find ways to sort of, obviously cut back on his workload. And that's, again, where, having Theo Jackson, to signing him to an extension is a big deal. What are they going to do with Cam Bynum? Like, is Cam Bynum are they going to be able to pony up some money? Because that's the other thing that I think a lot of people are kind of forgetting about with the cap space, and this could play into the Sam Darnold stuff as well. Yes, we all want the Vikings to go out in free agency and spend as much money as they possibly can, but they're also going to have to dip into some of that cap space that they have just to keep some of their own guys that played really well for them last year. Cam Bynum, Byron Murphy Jr. Those are going to be two guys that you're going to need to have back. And what's the price tag going to be on those guys? Because certainly Cam Bynum, I think, has really upped his value over the last couple of years. And so, if he goes out in a free agency and somebody wants to pay him $15 million a year, if you're the Vikings, do you want to try and match that? Do you want to try and come back with $16 million a year just to keep him? And that would be important if you decide to bring, whether Harrison Smith comes back or not, because you're going to need, I think, that depth at the safety spot. So Harrison, for me, I'm still not sure. I'm really like literally 50-50 on if I think he's going to come back or not. I have no idea. He has said, it sounds like he has said, like, when he's going to retire, like he's just going to do it, and he's not really going to make a huge announcement. It's just going to be like, I'm done. That's it. It's not going to be a huge sort of curtain call or farewell message or anything like that. It'll probably be, I'm done, and then he'll do like some sort of Instagram post or something, and that's it.
Do we need to worry that he Andrew Lucks it, plays like 3 games into September next year and just says, okay, I'm out. Peace. No,
he won't do that.
Yeah, that won't happen. On free agency, I think you and I are similar on this. I don't necessarily play, it's kind of like the draft. I don't necessarily play the I want this player card. I play the I want this position card. And I think the Vikings in free agency will all know down the road if they got it right. Just because you sign, oh, this is the best defensive tackle on the market, doesn't mean a year and a half from now it's going to be a great move. You know, as to your point, injuries happen. Maybe it's not a great scheme fit, whatever. But I do think this team, when it comes to the draft and free agency, needs to get better on the offensive line, needs to get better on the defensive line. And yes, you're talking about probably a gaggle of cornerbacks. And that, of course, could include Byron Murphy Jr., could be back, might not be. DJ Reed's name's been floating out there. I know they'll probably draft one with their limited resources. Maybe they'll get more resources over the next month or so, maybe even on draft night. The Slaymaker is now out there. I love Darius Slay. Maybe he would make some sense. But I look more position-wise. Do you agree on the positions that I said? And then am I missing any positions?
No, I agree. I think defensive line, I think, you know, and I know everybody wants to talk about the offensive line. I think with what we saw, and I've been saying this for a couple of years now, the Vikings need a super impact disruptor on the defensive line. And I'm not talking about edge rushers because they're really good in that spot. I'm talking about interior defensive line, defensive tackle, a guy that can get after the quarterback. They don't really have that. They have guys who are really good in the run. Harrison Phillips, I think, is a really good run stuffer. And, you know, guys like Jonathan Bullard did pretty good last year. Jerry Tillery was a nice sort of rotational piece on the defensive front. Redmond, you know, stepped up in some spots for them. But they need a guy that's going to be an impact guy. They need a guy that's going to, because we saw it. We saw what the Rams defensive front was able to do to the Vikings in the playoffs. And of course, we saw what the Eagles were able to do with the way Howie Roseman has built that roster and that defense. And they're going to lose. That team might end up losing a couple of those guys up front. So that to me is where it's going to start defensively. And then I think you start looking into corners, guys that can cover. I like the idea of Darius Slay as well. It's just going to be like, how much is that at what cost for a guy at that age? Because I mean, the Vikings gave Stephon Gilmore a $10 million contract last year for 1 year. I got to think Darius Slay is going to look for something similar. And is that a guy at that age, somebody that you want to bring in for multiple years, or do you want to try and make it be sort of a mercenary type of role like what Gilmore had last year on a 1-year deal? But that's intriguing. But yeah, those are the two positions. And of course, I know everybody wants to talk about interior offensive line. I think, yes, it should be addressed. I think it has to be not only I don't think it just starts with that, though, in terms of, you know, improving pass protection. A lot of my observations has been it needs to be some tweaks with the passing, you know, scheme in terms of, can you implement more of a short passing game into this offense? A lot of the stuff we saw Sam Darnold do last year was a lot of deep drops, sitting in the pocket, holding onto the ball for a long time, and trying to push the ball down the field for big plays. We all love big plays. The Vikings have guys on the offensive side of the ball who can make big plays. But can you utilize the short passing game a little bit more so that whether it's Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy, there are moments where if the pressure is coming on, they can get rid of the football right away, and they're willing to do that. You've got to have some options for these guys. Otherwise, you're gonna have a lot of the same problems. And there's no, I mean, everybody wants Trey Smith. You know, I know the Chiefs just franchised him, but everybody was talking about Trey Smith. Well, look what happened to the Chiefs' offensive line in the Super Bowl. They got blown up because the Eagles had beasts on the defensive front. And so you can go out and spend all the money you want in free agency on guards left, guards right, you know, go get another center and upgrade everything there. But if you're going up against a team with a really strong defensive front, it's just not going to matter, because even some of the best offensive lines in the league have been obliterated by these strong defensive fronts. It's just the way the league is going right now.
Here's a take for you that I think is very under the radar, but I think important. It'll underscore a couple things. One, there is no perfect team. Even the teams that win the Super Bowl would tell you there's things they need to improve upon to be better at. One thing I think the Vikings need to do, and again, so much easier said than done, because most guys can't play both positions. Some guys do out of necessity, but it's really not a strong suit. The Vikings, whether it be via the draft or free agency, I think need to have another good insurance plan at left tackle and right tackle, because the next time Christian Darrisaw plays a full season will be the first time he's played a full season. And Brian O'Neill, as he's gotten older, we've seen there have been more injuries. There have been more issues. It's also the nature of just being a bigger person playing that position. You're going to get nicked up and miss games. I don't think the Vikings are in the position where every year they can trade a mid-round draft pick to go get some tackle or offensive lineman who is available in and around a trade deadline. So I love Christian Darrisaw. I love Brian O'Neill. I'm not knocking them. Injuries are a part of the game. But the answer, and the Vikings know it, can't be, oh, Christian Darrisaw is going to miss 6 weeks. Dan Questenberry, go out there and do your best. Can Dan do his best in a game? Sure. You don't want him starting every game. And I don't know what that is. I go back to when Brian O'Neill was drafted. He was drafted late in the second round, and he was basically sold as a project that he would have went higher, but there was a lot of stuff to work on. Well, he ended up playing earlier than expected and did a pretty darn good job. Again, Vikings don't have a plethora of draft picks, but that's kind of something that I would be looking at in the mid-round. Is there somebody out here that we feel comfortable with that maybe the rest of the league doesn't, that if they need to play in year one can be a factor? I just think that that's huge. It's huge for keeping J.J. McCarthy healthy and on schedule if he's playing. It's also huge for the psyche of Sam Darnold if Sam Darnold is playing. I just think you need to make sure you have a backup plan at those tackle positions, because your tackles, I don't want to say they're aging. Brian O'Neill's only 29. Christian Darrisaw is mid to late 20s at this point.
25, I think.
Yeah, so mid-20s. Mm-hmm. But again, Darrisaw's never played a full year. So I just think you need to be mindful of that, and I'm sure the Vikings are.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at all spots really. And by the way, what I was saying before, I'm not saying don't address anything on the offensive line at all because you just throw your hands up because these defensive lines are so good. That's not what I'm saying at all. The Vikings should absolutely look into trying to upgrade on the interior of the defensive front, or the interior of the offensive line, sorry. But, you know, to your point about the tackles, yeah, I think with what we've seen from Christian Darrisaw now, you know, what happened with Darrisaw last year was kind of a freak thing. You know, somebody rolled up on him and he tore his ACL. And when that happens to big guys, it's almost worse, it seems like. But, you know, so that was kind of, for all we know, you know, if that doesn't happen, he does end up playing the entire season. It's all, you know, before it's always been like little things. I know, like at the start of his career was like an oblique thing where that kept him out for a little bit. You know, that sort of stuff is where it gets kind of frustrating because it's not like an in-game freak thing that happens. It's more of like just something with their body that just doesn't want to act right. So for all we know, he might have stayed healthy for the entire season last year. But I do think you're right in that they've got to find a way in case one of those two guys goes down, or heaven forbid, both of them go down, you've got somebody that can step in there and at least hold the fort down in a way similar to what Cam Robinson did for the first, 5-6 games that he played. I mean, he kind of fell apart late in the season. But those first 5 or 6 games that he played after they traded for him, he was actually pretty solid. He was okay. He wasn't Darrisaw, obviously, but he held things down okay. I think it would be helpful for the Vikings to have somebody like that in-house already that can just, if Darrisaw has to miss 3 or 4 games in 2025, that guy can step in and be sort of the Cam Robinson of early times of just like, we're going to hold this down for a little bit until Darrisaw is able to come back. No, I'm with you on that. It's just, where do you find that guy? Do you use a late round draft pick on a guy like that? And if you do, is he actually going to be that guy right away and available to do that if something were to happen with Darrisaw or O'Neal? And also, like, if you decide to go in free agency, who is that guy and how much is he going to cost?
One final question for you. It is away from football. It's away from Minnesota Wild hockey, so we don't look stupid again. It's away from even the Minnesota Timberwolves. Go for basketball. Is Ben Johnson coaching for his job on Sunday when they take on mighty Rutgers in Piscataway? And is he perhaps coaching for his job in the Big Ten tournament, which he is? I'm not sure if it's official yet, but looking at the standings and the tiebreakers, I think it's pretty darn close to being official that he will qualify for the Big Ten tournament. Let's have a parade down University Avenue. Is he coaching for his job? I waffle back and forth, and it's not always independent of when the Gophers win and lose. By the day, I think I can make a case that he's probably back. I'm not saying he should be, but I can make a case that he comes back. I think I can make more cases to move on from him, but there is also a case to be made for him to be back next year. My gut says he's not, but how important is Sunday and the Big Ten tournament to Ben Johnson and keeping or not keeping the Gopher basketball job? Or is it important at all? Some could say the only reason that it should matter is if he goes on to win the entire Big Ten tournament. Because there is the argument to be made, if you don't know after 29 games, well, then why are you in charge of the program? Speaking of the athletic director. I'm just generally intrigued because I pay too much attention to this stuff, Manny. Heading into the Wisconsin game, per a couple of different bracketology sites, your Gopher basketball team was the last team in the NIT. So logic would tell you after the loss to Wisconsin, they're probably now out of the NIT, needing a couple wins to maybe even be in the last 4 in what I call the little dance. Other people call it the not invited tournament. I don't know. I've joked with you for years. I think the only tournament with integrity is the NIT because they take the best teams. If I was the NCAA, I would have veto power of up to 6 teams. I saw somebody won a conference tournament game last night. They're 5-26. If that team went all the way on to win their conference tournament, I would say congrats, hang the banner, you qualified, you're not coming.
You're not invited.
You can go to the NIT. So I just think we've talked about this. There's so many reasons to not blame Ben Johnson, and he shouldn't be. My argument has always been, if everything's going to remain the same, and this is the hardest job in America, as Seth Davis said, which I will vehemently argue with him, he is wrong. It's not an easy job, but it's not the hardest job in the Power 5 or Power 4 now. I'll disagree with him on that. But I could make the argument, which I have to you, is if you haven't made an NCAA tournament in 4 years and you haven't sniffed it, even in the new era of college basketball, give somebody the same set of crappy circumstances and see if they can do better in 4 years. That's my argument. Also, as we've talked about, Manny, 10 seniors on the roster. Yeah. Even if Ben Johnson has more NIL money next year, do we really think it's going to be dramatically better when he needs to replace the entire roster? Literally almost the entire roster. So I don't know. I guess people know where I'm leaning on this. I will say this, as I've said numerous times. If Ben Johnson's back, I'm going to support him, and I hope the Gopher basketball team goes 22-8 next season. I'm not out to get Ben Johnson. I just fail to see how this is going to get better under Ben Johnson.
Well, let's go back 4 years. Was it Yeah, it was 4 years ago when Ben was hired, and they moved on from Richard Pitino. What was the whole reason why they moved on from Richard Pitino and ultimately decided on Ben Johnson? Recruiting.
Yep.
Right? Because Ben was thought to be the guy that could get the recruits that Richard Pitino supposedly couldn't get.
Except for the ones from Lakeville, Minnesota.
Well, I mean, it's so here we are. We're 4 years through it, and sort of that's kind of the period of like a full draft class, right? Of 4 years, and this is where we're at.
But I will say this, though, and this is where I'll defend him. He has gotten the recruits here for the most part, but he hasn't been able to get them to stay. And I don't put that on him unless he goes to, Pharrell Payne. Hey, instead of making $400,000 at Texas A&M, I can give you 50 and a Raising Cane's gift card.
Yeah.
I don't put that on him, but also I still have to put the results on him because he's identifying the portal players he's bringing in.
Yeah.
And overall, the win and loss record falls on him. Even if the deck is stacked against him, it still falls on him.
That's kind of what I was getting at, is ultimately, for whatever reason why you brought him in here, you're not getting the kind of results that you're expecting. If basically what I'm getting at is, you could have kept Richard Pitino around for the last 4 years. If these were the results you were going to get, you could have just kept Richard Pitino around. Now, Grant, I was one of the biggest critics of Richard Pitino while he was here. With that said, though, the overall results of what we've seen in the last 4 years, it just hasn't been good enough. And I'm not one of those people that thinks that the Gophers should be going to the Sweet 16 every other year or anything like that. But with what we're seeing, I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, Ross, we were just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about, they beat USC, they went out to LA and beat the two LA teams. If they can find a way to win, three or four of their last 5 games, maybe they can, get a decent seed in the Big Ten and win a couple of games, and who knows what might happen. And then they follow that up with losing to Penn State Northwestern at home. 2 of the worst teams in the conference. So I just, when that type of stuff happens to me, I'm at a point now where I think it's just time to move on. Now, to your point, not all of this is his fault. Obviously, you and I have had numerous conversations about NIL and how much more needs to be invested into the men's basketball program. So
I would actually defend him and say most of it is not his fault, but that still doesn't mean you get to keep the job. Right. And that's the harsh reality of big time athletics. Because
to me, I think in his particular case, even if you have a lot of things working against you, you still have to be able to show a real reason why you should be kept around despite some of the things that are working against you. And losing to Penn State and Northwestern in back-to-back games at home, 2 of the worst teams in the conference, does not help your cause at all. And that's where it's kind of like, to me, it's like, all right, I think it's time to move on, because you got to do something here. You've got to make some sort of change. But as I've said many times, and you and I, we've talked about this off the air, you can make a change, but it doesn't just start there. You've got to, the whole thing, the whole way things are operated with the men's basketball program, there's got to be some changes. You've got to change the way you do some things. How much more gets invested into, Williams Arena? How much more money gets invested into NIL? Like the Gophers and the university are going to have to figure all of this stuff out. It can't just be, we're going to fire Ben Johnson and bring in another coach, because that coach might come in and might be better, but are you still going to get to where you really aspire to be, without making some of the other ancillary investments around the program to make it better?
Well, and the worst argument in all of this to me is when people talk about, he'll have more money next year because of rev share. Yeah, and so will every other school.
Yep.
So great, you're paying kids more, but then the kids you were competing for last year, they're now making more. So you're still at a disadvantage. So a lot of it, they do need to figure out how to get more NIL money for basketball And I would say that for all sports. I would say women's basketball, it's going to become a factor there. The Gopher hockey team, Manny, they're going to have to win a national championship soon, because if they don't, at some point, NIL is coming more for college hockey. And if the Gophers don't have the money in college hockey, they'll start falling behind other teams too. So NIL is a huge issue for a place like Minnesota. I want to talk about the Seth Davis thing really quickly. Seth knows more about college basketball than I ever will. I'm not, I mildly want to retract that I vehemently disagree with him. I just disagree. I disagree when you fire off a Molotov cocktail on a tweet in 140 or 280 characters and act like that's the end all be all without giving it context. You don't think Northwestern is as tough of a job in college basketball as Minnesota? You don't think Penn State is as tough of a job in college basketball as Minnesota? You go up and down the SEC. Go look at some of the teams in the ACC. Go look at some of the teams of the Big 12. You don't think they have some of the same issues that Minnesota does? Also, some of these other programs that you want to talk about and say, well, this program's better, this program's better. Okay, they might be, but they don't have the opportunity day in and day out to go beat a Big Ten basketball team. So, yes, there are a lot of issues. We've talked about them. But to act like, to call Ben Johnson elite, I hope he's elite. If he goes somewhere else and he's elite, good for him. It just further underscores the mess that's here. But to call him elite at this point, I mean, come on, Seth. It really sounds like I'm crapping on Ben Johnson, and to a degree I am. I want him to do well. I hope they go on it. I hope he wins the Big Ten tournament. He's not going to, but I hope he does. I'm not cheering against him. I'm just saying the argument can't just be, well, who are you going to get that's better? You have all this stuff stacked against you. Somewhere out there in this world of billions of people, there is a guy or gal who can coach the Gopher men's basketball team and take them to 3 tournaments in 4 years with the same set of circumstances. It's not easy. I acknowledge that. But there is somebody that can do it, and you owe it to the people that still show up to Williams Arena and support Gopher basketball to find that. And if you think it's Ben Johnson, then at the end of the year when you announce he's coming back, tell everybody, why is he coming back, and what are you going to do as a university to help him succeed? That's what I'm asking for.
Yeah, and I think it's I agree with you. I don't think it's the hardest job in the, because did he say it was the hardest job in the country, basically? Is that what he said?
Yeah, let me try.
I didn't see the tweet. I didn't see exactly what he said, but
I will find it for you and I will read it to you, because if I'm gonna rip him, I should probably give it the full context. But it's gonna take me a bit to find it because it was last Saturday. So let me scroll.
I'll say this while you scroll. If what he said was it's the toughest job in the country, I don't agree with that. But what I will say is that I don't know if it's fair to compare Penn State and Northwestern in this instance, because I think the expectations for those basketball programs are a little bit different from what they are here, because I think there is still, because this program has a Final Four under its belt, and yes, it does count, and yes, there should be a damn banner up there in Williams Arena. I do think there is a little bit of a different standard here in Minnesota, and a different expectation, a higher expectation than there is at, say, like a Penn State or Northwestern. Now, for Penn State, it's the way they treat their basketball program is certainly different from the way they treat their football program. That's pretty obvious. And Northwestern, I mean, Northwestern's, how many times has Northwestern even made the NCAA tournament? It's been like 3 or 4 times.
Literally a handful. And I have the tweet, and the more I read it, I didn't paraphrase it correctly, but I'm actually more annoyed when I read this out loud to you. Okay.
Okay.
It is a retweet of Brennan Rigsby hitting the game winner against Minnesota, which, by the way, good for Brennan Rigsby. Appears to be an easy kid to cheer for. Transferred here, started as a starter, then ended up riding the bench. Really shot poorly most of the year, but has played well the last month. Really, really good for him. So Seth Davis retweets the game winner and says, quote, Ben Johnson has done an incredible job with this team, period. One of the elite coaches in one of the toughest jobs in America. Well, that alone on its surface is wrong. There are 350 teams that play college basketball. There are 200 jobs tougher than the University of Minnesota job. Like, literally any job not in a power conference is a tougher job. Like, why? What is the point of that? Are you, not to be mean, are you Ben Johnson's friend? Do you respect Ben Johnson? That's fine. But this tweet's ridiculous. Sorry, Seth, and whatever. Come at me because you are the big fish in the pond. I'm not trying to rip you for that. And you know more than I ever will. I get that. But that to me that's borderline blasphemy to tweet something like that. It just is.
I hear you. I don't fully disagree with you, but I also don't fully disagree with him either. I think it's just kind of a balance.
I don't like the wording. I know what he's trying to say. But to end it with one of the toughest jobs in America, is it one of the tougher jobs in the Power Four? Sure, I would grant you that. It's not one of the toughest jobs in America.
Yeah, I mean, there are other jobs that are just a lot more challenging in terms of finding ways to get success. I just go back to, I think it's a very, very difficult job still relative to the expectations. And I think, and look, you and I, we both have had fairly high expectations for this program because we want to see this program be successful, because we've seen this program be successful in the past. It's tough, man. It's really, really, really difficult. And I just think that ultimately, whether it's Ben Johnson as the coach or not, the University of Minnesota has got to figure out a way, because it is possible. They've got to figure out a way. They've got to figure out a way.
His follow-up tweet, which I agree more with, his follow-up is a day later. And he says, fans of Gopher men's basketball confused as to why I called this one of the toughest jobs in America. Minnesota has been to one Final Four in its history, and that required extensive academic fraud. 14 tourney appearances in 85 years, 16 NCAA tournament wins, tough league, brutal weather, outdated facilities, minimal NIL. I understand fans want more, but if you think the problem is coaches, I respectfully disagree. Ben has done, now he changes his wording, a solid job. It's no longer elite. It's a solid job. It's a solid job this season, in my opinion, which again, I don't disagree with much of what he said. I agree with that middle portion. We talk about this all the time.
Yeah. See, that part right there that's where I'm really much more aligned with what he was saying. The way he worded that is much better. Yeah.
Me too. The middle part is so true. I'm even doing it. We act like, Gopher basketball is an NCAA tournament every year, and missing it for 4 years is a fireable offense. How can you have a job? Well, no, basically they make the tournament once out of every 4 years. I'm just simply saying, even if everything is the same, nothing is ever going to get better. You can keep trying till you can find somebody who can win at a higher level with those same set of circumstances. You can tell me, can't be done. I will tell you, absolutely, it can be done. In a world of billions of people, there is one college basketball coach out there who can come to Minnesota, win at a high level, and then burn and turn us to go to a better job. And I would be okay with that. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. Sorry, Seth Davis, if you happen to find this. I do respect you. I just passionately care about my program. And I don't think calling a coach who's barely won 20 conference games in 4 years elite just rubbed me the wrong way.
To me, it's just all about the wording. And you know me, I always go with the diplomatic approach to things. You and I were both pretty aligned on that type of stuff. To me, it's just about having a reasonable perspective on where everything is. And we don't have to use hyperbole. All due respect to Seth Davis, we don't have to use hyperbole to try and make your point. You don't have to call Ben Johnson elite, because he's not an elite coach.
Let's also
he's not the worst coach in the country.
No, he's not.
But he's not an elite coach. Like, yeah. And
okay,
I think his follow-up tweet, I think spoke more to the way that I view the program right now, is that there has to be some realistic understanding of like where the program is, what the program needs, and it it might start with moving on from the head coach, but it doesn't stop there. There's got to be other things that follow it. And I'm sure you probably feel the same way.
Well, it has to be an all-encompassing approach. I'm going to close with this. So this is not just a set. Everybody, even in this state, we say it. Oh, well, the weather. Can we stop using the weather? Wisconsin deals with the same weather. They can win. Iowa deals with the same weather. They win. Iowa State deals with the same weather. They can win. Syracuse deals with worse weather. They've won a GD national championship. Let's stop with the
weather has nothing to do with it.
The weather has nothing to do with it. The facilities, yes, that's a problem. At the very least, Williams needs a massive renovation. Okay, so I agree with all that, but let's stop with the weather. We do it in football too. Oh, the weather in Minnesota. Manny, I went to the Gophers at the Badgers last year. It was effing cold. But you know what? It was sold out. It's the stop with the weather excuse. It's just last time I checked, Manny, the only place that's 72 and sunny every day is San Diego, California. Everybody else deals with weather. That excuse is so stupid. Everybody on the East Coast deals with weather. Rick Pitino is dealing with weather at St. John's. Not a problem for him. Stop with the weather. It doesn't matter nearly as much as people say it does. And also, by the way, if you recruit these Minnesota kids that everybody wants that's so coveted, they know what the weather is.
Yeah.
They're not if you're to Florida because, I'm a 19-year-old kid, I want to go to Florida. No. The
reality is, as we're in the NIL era, if you go to a kid and say, here's $500,000 to come play at the University of Minnesota, that kid doesn't give a damn about the weather. He does not care. He cares about the $500,000 that he's going to get.
The weather thing, we have to stop. And when I say we have to stop, I think that also means this edition of Minnesota Sports Chat.
We went pretty long today.
We both have real work to do, so we should end it. Now, this was a ton of fun. The weather thing kills me every time. Apparently it's sunny and 80 in Madison, Wisconsin every day, and I just didn't know about it. That's what I'm learning.
All right, man. And sunny on Monday here, so that'll be nice.
Yeah, let's go. And then apparently another snowstorm in the century next weekend. Let's please hope that misses. Anything else here in the closing moments, Manny?
Just appreciate the time. Always love talking with you off the air and on the air, and we'll do it again soon.
I bleeping hate the weather. I won't lie about that, but
we all hate it. It's okay.
It's never once dramatically changed my thought on ever doing anything because it's cold outside or it snows. Give me a break. All right, thank you, Manny. Manny, what are you on the X machine?
Follow me at Manny Hill 84 on X, and follow mpsvoices.com for all the fun stuff that I'm doing in my regular day job.
Yeah, and Jazz88.FM as well if you want to throw some money that way to support the fine work of what they're doing with Minneapolis Public Schools. I am the Ross Brendel on the X machine. I should probably get back on that Blue Sky machine. We'll ponder that over the weekend. That's it for this edition of Minnesota Sports Chat. We will talk again real soon.